That would be great.
Good evening. My name is Darlene, and I am an alcoholic. And thank you, Jay, first and foremost, for inviting me here tonight to share my experience, strength, and hope. It's always an honor that someone thinks that you have something to say. I never think that I do, but thank you. This has been my birthday week. My sobriety date is April 11th, 1985. So I just a week ago celebrated 40 years of sobriety. And I got to tell you, it was so hard for me to say that I was going to be 40 years old. Um, I think partly because it meant that I was 40 years older. And if you were anything like I wasn't sure I wanted to be here. I didn't think that I would be here. Certainly not the way I was going. They said we talk about that. Our format is what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. And I almost sometimes don't want to revisit what it was like, because there are sometimes, I don't know about any of you guys, but there are sometimes when things that I've asked my higher power to remove, I've been totally willing to have them just gone away forever. They find their ways back in. And sometimes I got to do a little work, I got to do some extensive work, maybe in different cases, to have those things removed again. And a lot of that is some of that old stuff, remembering when I was a child. I was born and raised in New York, and I was the product of a Southern Baptist mom and a raging alcoholic father. And I remember as a child being so incredibly embarrassed by my father, and I'm talking about at a very, very young age. He was that guy that every time he went out, he came home with a new dent in the car. He was that guy that when he came home, he couldn't make it up the stairs. And so, we had outside stairs that led into the house. And so all the neighbors saw him struggling to get in the house. And all the neighbors saw my mom come out with the cotton balls and the ammonia that she would put under his nose so he could kind of come to and make it the rest of the way in the house. And us kids, we didn't like that, because for me, and I can't speak for my siblings, but for me, it made me feel like the pariah in the neighborhood. It made me not want to, not have anything to do with the other kids because they kind of guessed by what they saw on the outside of my house. And I'm thinking this, these are my thoughts. I'm thinking that they guessed what was going on inside my house by what was going on outside my house. If they only knew inside my house, it was much worse than anything they could have ever imagined what they saw on the outside. Because on the inside, my father was very violent. And I suspect that's where I got some of my later violence from. Not wanting to be like him, but becoming him and then some. But inside the house, he beat up on my mom a couple of times to the point where she had to take herself to the hospital. And he didn't see anything wrong with it. I never heard of him apologizing and saying, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it again. Um, he just was a bad man. And when I was 14 years old, my dad, I believe, committed suicide. He didn't really, as far as the definition of suicide goes, but he was such a drunk, and his heart started to give out. And the doctors, I remember, he was in and out of the hospital for a spell. And I remember the doctors, or I remember being told that the doctors had told him that if he stopped drinking, he probably would increase the years of his life. If he stopped smoking, he probably would increase the years of his life a little bit more. And it was almost as if my dad took it upon himself to drink more instead of 2/5 of whatever. His thing was Gordon's gin. Instead of 2/5, he drank four. And instead of 2 packs of cigarettes, he smoked three. And and it exacerbated his health condition a lot quicker. Um, and before we knew it, he was gone. And I didn't know how to feel about that. I didn't know, should I cry for this evil man? Should I what should I do? This was my dad, and I didn't know how to feel, but I have to tell you, I'd already from an early age adopted some feelings that I'd made my own that separated me from my one sister and three brothers. I had become in the early parts of my life that loner. I had become that person that I went to school and I got very good grades, and I'll tell you why I got those good grades a little bit later. But I came home and I did our chores and I did my work, but I stayed in my room and I read, or I created whatever I thought was in my creative mind at that time. And for some reason, and it's been brought to my attention years later in therapy and doing the work that we do around here. It was brought to my attention some things about why I behave that way. And I remember not feeling seen, so I didn't want to be seen. I remember feeling not being heard, so I didn't want to be heard. And at the earliest moments in my life, I can remember not wanting to be here. Now I have to tell you that I hope it doesn't affect anyone, but suicide is a very big part of my story. And I can remember at the earliest parts of my youth, I thought about not being here. And I developed very early on this mantra, well, maybe tomorrow. It was always maybe tomorrow I'm probably going to take my life. And I got to tell you, this is long, long, long before any substance ever entered my body. I am that person that these things were going on with me. I'm not that person that started doing anything at 9 or 10 or 11. I had my first substance at 17. So that kind of gives you an idea where I was at before a substance ever hit my body. And I was just a mess. And I struggled to survive in that house where I felt invisible. And when I tell you that my mom was this Southern Baptist. She took us to church like 5 times a week, you know, um, Sunday school, all day service, Sunday afternoon Baptist training service, prayer meeting, Bible study, and the whole lot. And I don't know, I was afraid of what I was being taught, and I was pretty sure the way I thought that I was probably going to go to hell, and I was pretty okay with that at the time. And life just went on, but life for me, as it went on, it got more and more difficult. And I didn't have any coping skills. I didn't have any survival tools until that one night. You all know what that night was. I went to an event, and I don't know why I was even invited to that event, because I'm that person that didn't have any friends, or I didn't want to hang out with too many people because they might get into who Darlene really is. Who Darlene is a real sad girl. And but I was invited to this event, and for the first part of the evening, I really believed I was drinking orange juice. Unbeknownst to me, I was drinking gin and orange juice. And something happened to me that night. I started to feel something that I had never, ever, ever felt before. And I was that person that always looked down when I spoke to anyone. I couldn't look you in the eyes. And that night, people were saying, "Hey, what's up?" And I was, "Hey, what's up?" back, but I was looking them in the eyes, and I'm feeling kind of funny, but I'm liking what I'm feeling. I'm feeling loose. The music's on, and I'm like boogieing to the music. And that's so not me. If I did any of those things, I did them in the silence and solitude of my bedroom. And here I am out in public, I'm moving, and I probably was singing. I don't know. I love to sing. I can't sing, but I love to sing. And and that night, I can tell you, on this night, April 19th, 2025, somehow I got home. Don't know from that night to this, but I made it home, and I made a decision that whatever took me to the point where I don't know how I got home. I wasn't going to go that far, but I had found the solution for me. And somebody was going to help me with that solution because, after all, I was too young to buy alcohol, and I hadn't found any other substances quite yet. So that had become my solution, and I endeavored to make it happen as best I could. Now, I know that we talk about this disease that we suffer from is a progressive disease, and of course, I didn't know that then. I just knew that I had found something that was going to help me survive, and and it did. I started to become a lot more alive. I started to become that person where those neighborhood peers that I didn't have anything to do with before. I started speaking to them, and they started speaking back. And and I even got invited to a couple of things, which was so not my MO. It really wasn't. And for me, it felt, now life feels normal. And for the first time in my young life, I think I went for quite a long period of time without thinking that I wanted to die. That was new for me. So, not thinking that I wanted to die, not thinking that I was going to kill myself was very, very empowering because I felt that whatever I was doing now, it was working. And I was on that what is that Gladys Knight song, Midnight Train to Nowhere. That's where it's not Midnight Train to Georgia, but I was on the Midnight Train to Nowhere. And I just kept riding, and eventually things got a little hairy. I got pregnant. I gave birth to my son. Things got a little bit more hairy, and I did the next best thing that we do. I did a geographic to Los Angeles with my son's dad, and made that my home until 7 years ago. And in the beginning of those days in LA, I continued what I had begun in New York. I didn't know anyone in LA. I had gotten a job right away, and my ex got a job, and we were living that life. He wasn't like me. He wasn't an alcoholic. He wasn't an addict. He was just a straight laced guy, and he loved me in a way that I couldn't love me. And that was real weird to me because I just thought I was so unlovable. But I took it in. I took it in with everything that I had to bring it in. And we lasted for a little while, but my disease, it started getting really, really bad, and he couldn't handle it, and I couldn't handle him. And eventually, um I found some other things, that whole mix and match thing. If this isn't working, let me try that. If this isn't working, let's try this together. The whole chemistry thing, I did that, and God, I'm off and running again. And our relationship was getting more and more toxic. And I remember we were going back to New York for a visit, and we were going to drive, and he packed the car too early in the day for me, and we got into a fight, and he said, take him to the airport. I took him to the airport and pulled up like Starsky and Hutch, get out while the car is still moving, and then drove to New York by myself with my son and taunted him the whole time I was there because, see, I'm empowered now. I've got something that works for me. So I'm not shy and quiet anymore. I've developed this big mouth, and all I was getting deeper deeper into a hole that it was going to be real difficult to climb out of. And that's the truth. And that trip back to New York by myself should have taught me something, but of course it did not. And I came back to California, and he stayed in New York, and we split up for good. And it was one of those things that got a little ugly because he kind of separated himself from his son. And I had to remind him that he was splitting up from me and not his son. And it was hard for us in the beginning, and we became good friends eventually, but sobriety had to play a big part in that. And he watched me from a distance wreck my life. He watched me from a distance reach this point where I don't know how I did it. I went to work every day in my business suits. I was a paralegal, and I did the job that I was supposed to do, albeit half the time I spent in the ladies' room. But I did the job I think that I was supposed to do. No, I didn't get fired, and no one really complained that I was screwing up. And eventually, I just couldn't. One night, that maybe tomorrow tape was playing so loud. And I don't know how far down the scale I had gone, but I had gone pretty far down that scale. It had been a lot of years, which I've heard some of y'all stories, and the years that I look at are nowhere near some of the years that I've heard, but it had been a lot for me, and I was a wreck. And that mantra of maybe tomorrow, it came true for me. Now, I need to back up and tell you that as things began to get worse for me, I went back to therapy. I'd been in therapy, in and out of therapy most of my adult life. And I'd gone back to therapy, and I had that particular therapist suggest that maybe I needed to go to get help. And she suggested that because I showed up pretty much every Saturday morning reeking of booze, that maybe I needed to go to AA. And I did, I went to check it out, and I didn't like it. I thought that I didn't relate. I didn't, there was no one in the rooms in 1984. That's when this was. No one, there was no one in the rooms who looked like me in the area of Los Angeles where I was. So, that was another no for me. And a couple of times after that, I felt that I should do something good for myself and just check it out here and there. And each time I checked it out, there was something else that I could add to the list why it wasn't for me. And it, truth no, truth be told, it wasn't for me because it just wasn't my time. And when I reached that point on that night in March of 1985, where the mantra just wasn't going to roll anymore, and maybe tomorrow was here, I took an X-Acto knife, and I really believed that I was going to kill myself. And I took that knife and I slit my wrist. And I don't know if I had a spiritual experience in that morning, in that moment, because I looked at what I had just done. I realized that my son was in the next room asleep. I realized that he was going to find me if I carried through this little episode of whatever it was. And I dialed 911 on myself because I believed I'm so important. I got to be at work in the morning after all. So they're going to come and they're going to get me. They're going to take me to the hospital. They're going to sew me up, and I'll come home, get a little bit of sleep, and I'll be at work in the morning. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, that didn't happen for me. And they transferred me to a dual diagnosis hospital, and I spent the next 40 days there. And that was the beginning of my journey. Those trips that I made in and out of the rooms, I'd gone into another fellowship too, checking them out. And it was all just about seeing what you guys were talking about. And I needed somebody, I desperately needed somebody to say something that I could wrap my arms around and say, I relate. That this is what I feel. Me too. They talk about the Me Too moment. Well, that was, I needed my Me Too in this program, and had not up until that point heard it. And then the 40th day when they let me out, I remember going to what became my home group before I came here to Charlotte, North Carolina. And I went and got my son, and I went to this meeting, and I have not looked back. And I don't know what the difference was. I can't tell you. But the difference was a little bit that I can tell you with my honesty is that I opened my ears and I began to listen. I stopped scoffing at the fact that people didn't look like me. I stopped scoffing at the fact that people didn't sound like me. I sat up and I listened. And, the hospital that I was in, they had panels coming there, and I sat there and I listened. And amazingly, a couple of the people that I had seen in the rooms had come on a couple of those panels in that hospital. And when I went rushing back to that one meeting, which was my home group, this one lady who became my sponsor came up to me and she said to me, she goes, "Are you finished?" And, to be honest with you, I couldn't say if I was or not. I wanted to be finished. God knows I wanted to be finished. I needed to be finished because I'd already convinced myself that if I wasn't, I probably was going to die. And I told her, I said, I don't know, but I hope I am. And without me asking her to sponsor me, she told me, I've watched you come in and out of here, and you come back dragging your tail. And so you're going to sit down in the front of the room. I don't want to see you in the Dare Me to Stay Sober section. I want to see you not sharing because we all know how to do this thing. I want you to shut up, listen, and, said it with a few expletives, so you kind of get the picture. And I had no choice but to do that. So every Saturday, I was at that meeting early, and if I needed coffee or wanted to have a cigarette, I did all that before the meeting started, and I was in the front of the room. I was not in the back of the room in the Dare Me to Stay Sober section. I did not share because I didn't know what I was going to be sharing about. That's what she told me, so I took direction for the first time in my life. And we got together and we started going through the book. And the first thing that she took me to was the blank page. And she asked me, "What do you see?" And I'm like, "I don't see anything." And she goes, "What do you see?" And I said, "I don't see anything." I'm thinking that this is a trick question and I don't have the key. And so I answered her again, "I don't see anything." And she said, "And that's what your blinkety blank knows about sobriety, God, and something else," she said. And that made me mad. That made me mad, but I knew she was telling the truth because I didn't know anything about recovery and I didn't know anything about God other than the punishing God that I had grown up with. And I had heard, I come into the rooms and I hear you people talking about this loving, caring, forgiving God, and I didn't know that God at all. But she promised me that if I did some work, that if I didn't rest on my laws, which she explained were my past successes, that I would have some success. She explained to me that there were a multitude of musts and promises in this work, and that they would come about in my life if I was diligent and followed her lead. And I didn't have any choice. I really didn't have any choice. So I followed her lead. I learned some things about myself. I learned why those substances became so important to me. I learned the traumas that I had made my identity stuck with me to the point that they were my identity. And I couldn't believe that that was who I had become. And she was not the kind of sponsor that was honey, baby, sweetie. She wasn't that kind of sponsor. She was tough as nails, and she told me these things, and she had me doing all this work. And for the first time in my life, I was doing something that was good for Darlene. And I have to tell you that I struggled with the second and third step because of my upbringing, and I didn't think I was going to make it, and I was really scared because I by this point in time, after I've learned some really important things about myself, I wanted to succeed. Whatever success looked like, I wanted to succeed. And when we got to talking about, God and having a relationship with him, I wasn't sure that that was going to happen for me, and I was very scared. And she talked to me about being willing, and we read the second and third step over and over and over again until something clicked for me. And that the simplicity of what clicked was, being willing, basically creating a relationship with a God that is there for me, not your God, not her God, not anybody else's but mine. And it doesn't have to be that God that I was raised with. And so my idea was so I can make up a God. And she goes, if that's how you see it, yes, make up a God. I'm like, okay. So I made up a God, and my God was the opposite of the God that I grew up with. My God was kind of like the God that you talked about in the rooms that I didn't understand, but it worked for me. And slowly but surely, I started to really begin to see things in my life change. The biggest thing in my life that I think I saw first was my son, who was 12 years old at the time. And I have to tell you, he was terrified of me because if I didn't mention that I was violent, I was. And he was very afraid of me because I didn't want to be bothered when I was doing my thing. And he had questions. He wanted to tell me about his day. And I just wanted to be in my room left alone. So I was not very kind to him. I certainly was not very loving to him. And I would raise my voice and he would cower. So that told me that I probably was hitting him too. I'm not proud of that. But, they said that the principle of the first step is honesty. That is my truth. I hit my son and I'm not proud of it. But what I began to see as I was developing this relationship with my own higher power, I began to see my relationship with my son change. I began to see him still want to have those conversations with me, but he's not flinching. He's sitting down. He's questioning. He was going to meetings with me, and he kind of became the meeting mascot after a while because at the evening meetings, he'd be in the back doing his homework. And at the late meetings on the weekend, he'd put two chairs together and he'd be back there sleeping. And some of the guys that I had become friends with on the weekends, they took him out. We had a softball league, and he would go and play softball with him. And it was like I had never seen him like that. And so this is like beautiful to me. I'm seeing God, I think, work in my home. I'm feeling something inside of me work for me. I don't understand it, but I'm feeling different. And the only thing I could say was, this must be recovery. I'm not recovered, but is this recovery? And I asked my sponsor that one time. I told her, these are the things that I'm feeling. Is this recovery? And she said, keep coming back. Gee, thanks, Spons. But I kept coming back. And we got to that inventory, and we talk about house cleaning. And I was just talking to a sponsee this evening about house cleaning and cleaning up all the muck and mire. And um and I kind of was excited in a way. I was very weird. I was kind of excited to do that inventory at first because I got to tell on everybody who had screwed me over. And she goes, if that's your get down, write it down. But it turned into a lot more than that. And And I'm glad that honesty is a principle that we abide by, because I had to turn a lot of that inventory around and be really, really honest. And it wasn't about what I thought people had done to me. It wasn't about any of that. It was about the feelings that I had inside. It was about the thoughts that were in my head. It was about stuff that probably hadn't even happened, but I believed it happened based on my interpretation of my relationship with certain people who ended up on my inventory. And I remember doing the fear and the sex inventory, and it was the same thing. And at the end, when I did my fifth step, and you go home and you spend that time with God, I didn't feel anything, and I was scared. What am I supposed to feel? Oh my God, I got to do this again, and I was scared, because now I'm doing some stuff, and I'm changing. I know I'm changing. How do I know I'm changing? Because you guys see me at the meeting every week, every night, and you're telling me, Darlene, you're changing. It's a beautiful thing to see. And I'm like, okay, I want to keep changing. I want to be a better version of who I've been my whole life. Because what I thought of myself my whole life was not good. If someone thought of you what I've thought of me your whole life, you'd want to hurt them, and that's what I thought of myself. And I wasn't thinking those things of myself anymore. I was like, I was going to work and I was doing a job. I was communicating with you guys in the room. They said change your playgrounds and change your playmates. I had done that. I was only hanging out with people in the rooms. And my life was getting what I could see as better. And when I got to those character defects, and my sponsor told me certain things about myself, I didn't bristle. I knew most of them to be true, because I'm a tough nut to crack. But I listened, and I paid attention, and I did the next right action where those character defects were concerned. And like I said earlier, character defects are one of those things for me that pop up again and again, and I become willing and willing and willing to have them removed, and I feel that they go away. And then some event in life happens. It's usually my sister. We have such a horrible relationship, and I don't know how to fix that, but I digress. But some of those character defects, they come back, and I've got to go back and I've got to do a deep dive on certain steps. And it's usually the third step, and it's usually the fourth step. And that's okay, because over the years I've learned that if I want to keep this, I got to keep busy. And so when it comes to those character defects that return, I look at them, and I look at them hard, and I do whatever's necessary to keep me here in this seat. And I remember that first amends list that I had. There were certain amends on there that I didn't want to make. One was to my father. He was buried here in Charlotte, and I in California at the time, and so it would have been going to his grave. And I told my sponsor I didn't want to make amends to him, and she said, how will that make you feel if you don't clear that wreckage and that thinking where your father is concerned? And I didn't know how to answer that. But upon quiet reflection, I thought that it would not bode well for my recovery. So when I was able, I came down here and I went to his grave, and I sat there for the longest time, and I said some babble. I don't know what it was, but I forgave him. I forgave him for hitting me 2 days before he died. I forgave him for beating on my mother. I forgave him for being the drunk who couldn't stick around for his kids. And I came away from that cemetery, and I had a freedom that I had never experienced before in my life. And this is to a grave. So imagine if he had been sitting across the room from me. But I think of him every now and then, and I wonder if he had had the privilege of what we sometimes take for granted, what we get here that is so wonderful and free. If he had the advantage to experience what we do, would he have embraced it like we do? Would he have benefited from it like we have? I often wonder about that. And but when it came around to making those other amends, I made amends like three times, 3 or 4 times to my son. And those were those I'm crying, buku tears, and I'm so sorry, I love you. and what my son said? He said, Mom, it's okay. It's okay. And I don't know what he was saying, it's okay too. But my son and my relationship, it really changed a lot. And it got so to the point where, now his mom's a single woman again. And he thought that the guys in the program were looking at me, and he had to put his chest up, and he couldn't let that happen. And it was kind of cute, but he was my protector. And he was learning the steps right along with me, and I thought that was really cool, because I am of the mind that the steps work for anybody. They don't just work for us. They're made for us, but anybody who wants to take them and utilize them in their life, I think that they are a tool worth you using. So I made those amends. I made amends to my mom. And I got to tell you, my mom and I had a real tough relationship in the early days. I didn't think she liked me. She told me that out of 5 kids, I'm the only one with a middle name, because my middle name had to be with a P. My name is Darlene Priscilla, and that the D stands for displaced, and the P stands for person. Now, later on, much, much later, she told me that she was joking. But you got to understand, as traumatized as I was, as invisible as I felt, as unseen and heard as I felt, I was I believed her. I believed that I was this displaced person, because I already felt like you didn't see me. I already felt like you didn't hear me. So you tell me that you give me a middle name because I'm this displaced person. Well, I mean, I took that and running. And when I realized that it was just a joke, ha ha, mom, not funny, our relationship began to change. And my mom made a few visits out to California. I had surgery one year. She came out there to be of assistance. She she became this staple in my life. And when she passed away, that probably was for me the most devastating loss, because I got to tell you, I'm pretty cheap, and I'm not proud of it, but my sponsor tells me, Darlene, you're not cheap, you're frugal. But no, I am cheap. My mother was in the hospital 13 years ago, and my siblings were here in Charlotte, and they were with her. I'm in LA, and I'm like, well, she's getting better. She's going home on Monday. So why do I need to be there? I'll come home at Thanksgiving, and we'll have a big old family reunion. And that Sunday she passed away. And I felt like crap. I i should have been here, and I wasn't, and I wanted to beat myself up. But thank God, I don't know when the obsession to drink or take other substances left me, but I realized in that period of time when I was going through that, oh my God, I didn't go home. I didn't say goodbye. I wasn't there, and everybody else was. I realized I'm doing some good things for myself, you know, and I worked through that. And my mom was cremated, and whenever I drive across country, I have a little thing like this, and she sits in the shotgun seat with the seatbelt around her, and I talk to her all the way from North Carolina to LA and back. So 10, 11, 12. A lot of people talk about we hang out there. I don't hang out there. I do to a degree, and thus I need to go work another step intensely. What it's like today, here I am in a state that I don't like. I thought I would like it. I forgot the most important thing when I came here, that other people don't change sometimes like you change. And I was expecting those family members to like, rah, rah, it's over, and we're just going to be this great family. Well, I've changed a lot, and they have not changed a lot. But it's all good. I'm here. I'm very busy. I got into service immediately. As a matter of fact, they had service commitments as I was driving here, and I've been doing them ever since I've been here. I've had a few sponsees. I have sponsees here and in LA, so I'm always doing something. If I'm not, I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. So that tells me that I must, Darlene's must is I must be busy. If I'm not, I got to pick up the phone. Hey, how you doing today? Um, uh, Want to have lunch? What's going on with you? Whatever it is, there are not as many meetings here as I would like. So I've got to, etch something out on those days where there aren't any meetings, and it's beginning to work. I'm not real happy with it, but this is where I've chosen to be, so I'm making it work as best I can. I travel up and down the highways couple, 3 times a year, going back to LA, and that works for me too because my tribe is still there, and they told me to build a network, and I've built that network, and most of those people are still in it, and my sponsor is in LA, and we still work together. We still work on Zoom, and people that I just absolutely love. Now, I got to tell you, I was the most unlovable person that you
5 minutes.
thank you that you probably would ever meet. I didn't think that I knew how to love anyone. I certainly didn't know how to love myself, as I said earlier. But one of the things that sobriety has taught me, it's taught me first and foremost what love is, what it is that I feel for those people that are in my life, and that I don't have to do anything for people to love me and vice versa. And when I realized that, my life just blew up, and it sustains me in a way that I never dreamed possible. So today, my life is good, even when it's bad, even when that crap shows, it rears its ugly head and says, Darlene, you're going to have a bad day. Like I try and pray or meditate and say, no, I'm not going to have a bad day. I'm going to have an okay day. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But if I were to say, what am I today? On 4/19/25, I am grateful. I am grateful. I am grateful because I never expected to be 70 years old, sober 40 years, and loving life. Never expected it. But I am 70 years old, 40 years sober, and I love life and I love you guys. Thanks for letting me share.
Yay. Thank you so much, Darlene. Let me stop the recording.